There's a woman in her 60s in Kyoto whose waistline hasn't changed meaningfully in 20 years. She's never stepped foot in a gym. She's never counted a single calorie. She's never done a fasted cardio session or tracked her macros on an app. And yet, by almost every metric Western fitness culture obsesses over, she's exactly what people spend thousands of dollars and countless hours trying to achieve. What if the difference between her flat, stable midsection and the slow, creeping belly fat so many people in the West battle for decades has nothing to do with willpower, gym memberships, or genetics, and everything to do with 5 quiet daily habits she's never once thought of as a diet? By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly what those 5 habits are and how to start applying them today without buying a single supplement or signing up for a single class. Before we get into the habits, we need to name the real enemy here because it isn't fat itself. Visceral fat, the deep abdominal fat that wraps around internal organs, is uniquely dangerous, not just cosmetically frustrating. It's metabolically active tissue that releases inflammatory compounds directly into the bloodstream, and it's disproportionately driven by chronic stress, blood sugar spikes, and inflammation. Not simply eating too much. This matters because the 5 habits we're about to cover don't target belly fat through punishing exercise. They target the actual biological drivers behind it. The first habit is hara hachi, eating until you're roughly 80% full. The real Japanese term comes from Okinawa, the region with one of the highest concentrations of centenarians on Earth, and it isn't a diet rule so much as a built-in stopping point. A deliberate choice to end a meal slightly before the point of complete fullness. The practice. Traditional Japanese meals are structured to support this naturally, served in small individual dishes rather than one large plate, which slows eating and makes it easier to notice fullness cues before overeating happens. There's no calorie counting involved, simply a cultural habit of eating slightly less than maximum capacity at every meal. The scientific validation. Eating until 80% capacity triggers a process called cellular autophagy, the body's internal cleanup system, where cells clear out damaged components and reduce inflammation when they're not constantly overwhelmed by digesting excess food. Chronic overeating, by contrast, keeps insulin levels persistently elevated, and elevated insulin is one of the primary hormonal drivers of visceral fat storage, specifically around the abdomen. Stopping slightly before full, done consistently across thousands of meals over a lifetime, adds up to a measurably different relationship between food intake and fat storage. The second habit is built around dashi and umami-rich foods, replacing processed flavor enhancers. The real Japanese term, umami, the savory fifth taste, found naturally in foods like kombu seaweed, dried bonito, miso, and fermented soy products. The practice. Rather than relying on sugar, excessive salt, or processed flavor additives to make food taste satisfying, traditional Japanese cooking builds deep savory flavor through naturally umami-rich ingredients. A simple dashi stock made from kelp and dried fish forms the flavor base of countless dishes, delivering deep satisfaction without the blood sugar spikes that come from sugar-heavy flavoring. The scientific validation. Researchers studying umami and satiety have found that umami-rich foods trigger stronger and longer-lasting feelings of fullness compared to foods that rely primarily on sugar or fat for flavor. Partly because umami receptors on the tongue and in the gut send distinct satiety signals to the brain. This means a meal built around umami depth feels satisfying at a smaller portion size, naturally reducing the kind of overeating that drives abdominal fat accumulation, without any conscious restriction required. The third habit centers on fermented foods as a daily staple rather than an occasional addition. The real Japanese term, hakushokuhin, fermented foods, miso, natto, pickled vegetables called tsukimono, and soy sauce, are eaten in small quantities essentially every single day in traditional Japanese cuisine. The practice. A typical traditional breakfast might include miso soup and a small serving of natto, fermented soybeans, alongside rice. A combination that delivers a meaningful dose of beneficial bacteria with essentially no effort or specialized supplementation required. The scientific validation. Emerging research on the gut microbiome has found a strong, consistent link between gut bacterial diversity and visceral fat regulation. Studies have shown that certain strains of beneficial bacteria, the kind abundant in fermented foods, are associated with improved metabolic markers and reduced abdominal fat storage, likely through their effects on inflammation and how efficiently the body processes and stores dietary fat. A daily, unglamorous serving of miso soup is, biologically speaking, doing more for visceral fat regulation than most people realize. The fourth habit is built around green tea consumption as a daily ritual rather than an occasional beverage choice. The real Japanese term, just acha, simply tea, though the specific habit refers to regular daily consumption of green tea, particularly varieties rich in a compound called catechins. The practice. Green tea is consumed multiple times throughout a typical day in Japan, not as a weight loss strategy, but simply as the default beverage choice, replacing sugary drinks, juices, and sodas almost entirely in daily life. This isn't a special fat-burning tea marketed at a premium price, it's simply what's in the cup by default, the scientific validation. Catechins, particularly a compound called EGCG found abundantly in green tea, have been studied extensively for their effect on fat oxidation, the body's ability to break down and use stored fat for energy. Multiple studies have found that regular green tea consumption is associated with modest but measurable reductions in visceral fat over time, likely through a combination of increased fat oxidation and mild thermogenic effects. The benefit isn't dramatic on its own, but replacing sugary beverages with green tea as a daily default removes a significant source of the liquid sugar that directly contributes to abdominal fat storage, while adding a mild metabolic benefit on top. The fifth and final habit is walking as transportation, not as exercise. The real Japanese term, sometimes simply described through the broader cultural reality of haku, walking, woven into daily commuting and errands rather than scheduled as a separate workout. The practice. In many Japanese cities, daily life simply requires substantial walking to train stations, between errands, up and down stairs in multi-level train systems, accumulated not through a dedicated gym session, but through the basic structure of how a day unfolds. This kind of movement is called non-exercise activity thermogenesis by researchers, the energy burned through everyday movement that isn't formal exercise at all. The scientific validation. Studies on non-exercise activity thermogenesis, often abbreviated NEAT, have found that the calories burned through incidental daily movement, walking to a train, climbing stairs, standing rather than sitting, can significantly exceed the calories burned during a single dedicated workout session, simply because it's spread consistently across the entire day, every day, rather than concentrated into one short, intense burst. Crucially, NEAT has also been specifically linked to lower visceral fat levels, independent of formal exercise habits, because consistent low-intensity movement throughout the day helps regulate blood sugar and insulin levels far more steadily than a single workout followed by hours of sitting. As you've seen, the difference between a stable midsection maintained effortlessly for decades and a slowly expanding waistline despite genuine effort isn't about more willpower or harder workouts. Hara hachi stop eating slightly before full. Umami build deep flavor satisfaction without relying on sugar. Hakushokuhin make fermented foods a daily, ordinary habit. Acha default to green tea instead of sugary drinks. Haku build walking into your day's basic structure rather than treating it as a separate task. None of these 5 habits require a gym membership, a meal plan, or a single dollar spent on supplements. They require small, consistent shifts in default behavior, repeated daily, allowed to compound quietly over months and years, the exact opposite of the dramatic, unsustainable approaches most fat loss advice pushes. If this changed how you're going to approach your next meal or your next walk, share it with someone who's tried every extreme diet except the boring, sustainable kind. This has been a look into the psychology and physiology behind Japanese habits around weight and metabolism, not a prescription, a perspective. If this resonated, hit subscribe so you don't miss what's next, and drop a comment letting us know which of these 5 habits you're starting today. We'll see you in the next one.